I mentioned to you at 1-3 with the Giants that we may be on the verge of seeing them have to sell off players if this season gets worse.
Ridiculous then.
It was ridiculous then. Mm-hmm. My premise was based on the fact that they had games coming up against Miami and Buffalo, and if they were staring at 1-5, it would make the most sense to take pieces on this roster and start to sell it off because the NFL has become like baseball in terms of the trade deadline.
Yes, that's true.
Has your opinion changed? Because if they don't beat Washington on Sunday, Tiki, and they're staring 1-5, 1-6 straight in the face, don't you have to look at this roster and say, okay, this isn't working. Let's add draft capital for the future.
So the issue, and before I get to the answer, is that as much as the Giants tried to do this offseason, bringing in Paris Campbell, Darren Waller, we know they drafted Jalen Hyatt. We know all the moves that they made. Offensive line, they didn't do really anything, and that was the core of the problem this year. The offensive line has been bad, like historically bad, and we've talked about that a lot. But it's also the moves that they did make to put pieces around Daniel Jones it's not panning out, right? None of the receiving talent is, number one material. Yeah, Jalen Hyatt could become that. I don't know. He hasn't played a ton. But so when you look at the talent on the team, you're saying, well, what did we expect, right? If it's not Saquon Barkley making huge plays, where are the big plays coming from? Because that's what I thought was going to change this year from last year. It wasn't just going to be Saquon Barkley breaking a 50-yarder that was giving the Giants this change of field position momentum. And so if they lose again, so say they lose to the Washington Commanders this weekend, a game in which I'm calling, and they're 1-6.
Yes.
You're sitting there saying, all right, this is not going to get better. The offensive line took another hit, as we just heard. Shane Lemieux is now on IR. What are you salvaging, right? Are you just trying to get these young players better, or do you need to make your team better? Well, and I would say it's the latter. So if this game...
Which is what? The latter is what? To make the team better?
To make the team better. And you make the team better by positioning yourself to bring in better players.
Yes.
Which is trading away some of the assets.
Well,
at the time, Evan, that you first brought this up, my thought was, well, who are you trading? Right? Who's valuable? And I know Saquon is in that conversation when he's healthy. At the time, he wasn't healthy. Mm-hmm. He looked somewhat healthy this past weekend and broke off a couple of big runs. Xavier McKinney, I guess. But
if you're not planning on keeping him, he's a free agent at the end of the year.
But he's having a down year. And so where's his value? I guess Adoree Jackson.
Yes, that was the other one.
Who's played a lot in the slot and moved around a little bit, having an okay year, but nothing. He's not trending towards being an all-pro. And so when you look at the Giants and the potential to sell off if they go 1-6 by losing this week to the Commanders, I'll go back to what I thought initially back in 3 weeks ago. Well, who the hell are you selling?
Well, it starts
what
with
value are you getting for them?
It starts with Saquon Barkley. And the different and just to remember on timing of this came about, the discussion you and I had 2 weeks ago was a few days after they lost to Seattle, which I think was the real eye-opening game of the season.
Yeah, that was the pure tier game
no doubt, because as bad as the losses were to San Francisco and Dallas, losing 70-12 over those two games, you looked at it and said, well, they're better. They're really good teams. Getting blown out by Seattle at home 24-3 was the eye-opener. That was the moment you said, uh-oh, this season really may go bad. And it was not a surprise with games in Miami and Buffalo that you were more likely than not going to lose both of those games, which they have.
Yeah.
So the guy you start off with is Saquon Barkley. And there are two reasons why you consider selling off pieces. Number one is the obvious, and that's to collect draft capital for next season. Draft capital that can be used to simply draft players, draft capital that can be used in a future trade to maybe move up in the draft and select somebody that you're eyeing. But there's another reason why selling off pieces makes sense, and this is the uncomfortable part, but it's the truth. And I say uncomfortable because I don't even like it myself as a fan. I know Sean doesn't like it because we're the kinds of fans, I think, that when we sit down on Sundays, no matter how bad a season is going, our knee-jerk reaction is to root for our team. I've never rooted against the Jets, even in the tank year of Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah.
I don't think, as much as my brain told me losing was better, and as much as Sean's brain will tell him losing is better, he will ever sit there on a Sunday afternoon on November 26th against the Patriots and say, I hope we lose. But trading off talent not only gives you assets, it allows you the safest way to lose.
Well,
if Saquon Barkley isn't on this team, there's a better chance you lose. If Xavier McKinney isn't on this team, there's a better chance you lose. And what is the result of losing? A better draft pick.
Yes, but you know what also is the result of losing? It is a depressed locker room. It is a depressed narrative about this team. It is a, man, is this coach the right coach? Like, so many different questions start to prop up and become, the predominant talking point when you lose, even if it is intentional. And I've always maintained this. It is impossible to make kids, football players, want to lose. It's impossible.
Not suggesting that,
It's
by the way.
impossible to make a head coach want to lose.
Not suggesting that either.
It's impossible. And the reason it is impossible, and general manager Joe Shane, it'd be impossible because the reality is that lives on your resume. It becomes who you are and who people think you are. They want, nationally, no one's going to look at the context and say, oh, yeah, this is good for them. You can do that in other sports. You can't do that in football because it's such a bottom line business. And if you lose too much, you're gone, man.
Well, I want to make something clear. I never think a head coach is going to try to lose, but by taking talent away, it benefits you in two ways.
Yes, but then think about what you're saying. By taking talent away, that would be Joe Shane taking talent away from Brian Daboll. So after a year plus of cohesion and walking step in step to try to rebuild this giant program, now all of a sudden you're going to divide the goal line.
Well, it's not dividing. It's understanding. Look, I'd actually push back on one thing you said because you said it creates more questions about even this head coach as the losses pile up. Mm-hmm. Here's why I actually disagree with you. We as New Yorkers, we're smart and we like truth. When the New York Rangers a few years ago wrote a letter to their season ticket holders and said, look, we're very disappointed with what's going on. We are rebuilding. Mm-hmm. Most Ranger fans said, okay, they're telling us what they're doing. Yeah. They're rebuilding. If the New York Giants over the next 2 weeks trade away Saquon Barkley, trade away Xavier McKinney, and whomever else, and they're collecting draft capital for the future, we would then look at Daboll's job over the next 9 weeks differently. We'd say, yeah, they took talent away. They're doing the right thing. They're collecting capital for next year. They're thinking about 2024. So in a weird way, Daboll losing games without talent will actually give him a softer landing than losing games with talent.
I mean,
am I wrong?
You're not wrong, but it's hard for me to look at that and accept it. And so if Brian Daboll all of a sudden has less talent around him, I'm still going to say, because I didn't think he had a ton of talent last year, I'm still going to say, okay, but I still expect you to win. I still expect you to be competitive.
Right.
I still expect these games to not be 35-3 blowouts. And if they're not, you start questioning his coaching acumen, which isn't fair to him because you've now taken away his best talent, which wasn't top of the line anyways, but now you're taking away his ability to do his job. And that makes it really, really hard to reconcile.
So here's my important question for you because I think it's all related. And rebuilding in the NFL can happen quickly. It actually can. You make the right moves, you can turn this thing around quickly. So the Giants giving up on this season, and I mean this if they lose to Washington. If they beat Washington and they're 2-5, you almost give them a reprieve and say, okay, you got one more game before the trade deadline. Go beat the Jets. Because if you beat the Jets and all of a sudden you're 3-5, it's on.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, I get that. So I'm not saying a trade should happen today. I'm saying if you lose to Washington and now you're 1-6, then I think it's a no-brainer. But if you lose these games, your focus can't necessarily be, well, what does the locker room think of it? Your focus has to be, hey, how do I pivot in 2024? And there are going to be a lot of new questions about 2024. I think the jury is still out on how most of us are going to feel about the quarterback in 2024. And I mean that a lot based on this injury.
Yeah.
If he doesn't play the rest of the season, it's fair to say I can't trust him to be healthy. If he does play and he plays well, great, he's our quarterback.
Yeah,
if
it's
he
hard
plays,
to minimize that. It's hard to minimize.
Well, that's
that.
why the question on the quarterback is the jury's out. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it has to do with health, and some of it has to do with the way he plays. But you have to create a situation in which you are best to pivot in 2024. Collecting draft capital is the way to do it. Now, here's a good retort if you believe this, because I'll ask it to you bluntly. You think Saquon Barkley should be on the team next year? Are you going to play the same song and dance with him?
Yes, I think he should be. Now, will he be? Probably not.
Well, if the answer is probably not, then why the hell wouldn't you trade him now? If he's not on the team next year, then now is the time. As teams are looking at trading for Derrick Henry, you jump in and say, hey, I got news about Derrick Henry. He's older. He's got more wear and tear. Saquon actually gives you more versatility, catching the ball out of the backfield. Hello?
Yeah.
Saquon's available.
Yeah, he's the better option if you're looking for a veteran running back. There's no doubt about it. Now, the challenge for me, though, is that Saquon is a leader in that locker room. It's one thing to trade maybe like the second or third alpha, right? But the guy, and that's Saquon. He is the captain. I remember asking Joe Shane this last year, and because this also came up a year ago, sell Saquon at his height, right? He's having a resurgent season. Trade him. At some point, you'll get maybe a second rounder or maybe even higher if someone's really desperate for a playmaking running back who can, as you mentioned, do things out of the backfield as well, or even line up as a wide receiver. And Joe said, why would we do that? He's our captain, right? If we remove him from the locker room loses something. And I still believe that that's the case, which is why I hope he's here a year from now, because he's part of this. Rebuild's too big because I don't think they're in a rebuild. Retool. He's part of this retool. And if he's healthy and he's playing like he did last week and early in the season and all of last year, Saquon is one of the most valuable running backs in the NFL, period. So if you lose that, how are you replacing it? Right? I don't think it's Matt Breida. I don't think it's Eric Gray.
The replacement is probably not on this roster,
Exactly.
But what if you're walking away with great draft capital for him? That wouldn't change your view on it, because all you need is one team, or really two teams, to get into a fight or a bidding war over the next few weeks, and maybe you get a package back that none of us expect.
I know what you're saying, and in theory, I can agree with you. But in practice, there's no way I see it happening, because I don't think that the Giants can afford to be that team. Think of the years of mediocrity. Hell, some of it was mediocre. Right, that the Giants weathered for, since that last Super Bowl. I mean, there were a couple, decent seasons here or there, but it was a lot of, we suck.
Yeah, no, there's been mostly bad.
Fan base is just like disgusted.
Yeah.
Not even going to the games, right? We saw a resurgence, and they didn't even go to the games. There's no way the Giant fan is going to accept.
But that's not.
Is going to accept that again.
But Tiki, that's not.
It's going to create a. All right, here we go again.
No, I don't think it will.
Nobody wants that.
Here's why I disagree with that. I don't think it will, because if you're taking a player like Saquon and you're getting back a lot of draft capital, let's say it's a 2 and a 3. I don't know. Maybe it is. I'm already hearing about all the teams lining up for Derrick Henry.
Yeah.
And coincidentally, a lot of them are AFC teams. You could tell your fans, hey, yeah, this was a bad year, and it's going to get ugly. And I think Giant fans wouldn't be stupid to it. They'd say, yeah, it was a bad year, but look, here's why things are getting worse, because it's going to help us next year and the year after that. And Saquon Barkley is a year-to-year proposition. I have great respect for him.
Yes,
I believe
I do
he's a leader in that locker room too, but here's the problem. How many more years is he even going to be here? Even if you're right that he's here next year, great. Is he here the year after that? Are we going to play a one-year deal game with Saquon Barkley for the next how many years, when you could potentially get a return that may not only help you replenish this roster, but if you do want to trade up for a quarterback, maybe you have decided to move on from Daniel Jones. A, the losing in the short term will benefit you, and then B, having extra draft picks will benefit you.
Yeah. No, what you're saying, you're not wrong. And I'm not like vehemently against it, but I just feel like it's hard to recover from those things.
What do you mean by that? You don't think Giant fans would be able to?
No, I'm talking about the locker room. Who cares about the fan at this point? I'm talking about the team, right? Like, what happens to Brian Daboll if he's willingly accepting that this is going to be a struggle, and all the narrative that he's talked about for a year and a half about being accountable and earning your stripes goes out the window because you had to retool. And by the way, coaches, very rarely do coaches survive that. They just don't. And so I think Brian Daboll would be putting himself, Joe Shane would be putting Brian Daboll in a position to do something that's not good for Brian Daboll. And I don't know if he recovers from it. So I hate the talk about tanking for X or trading off pieces for Y, because you don't recover from that stuff. Like it doesn't. You don't just all of a sudden turn back into a great coach. It's just really hard. Like coaches don't have, and general managers for that matter, they don't have unlimited, reign. It ends, especially once the narrative changes. And I think that's setting yourself up for a narrative change that's hard to recover from.
I would hope that the coach of the year that kept the locker room together could survive 9 games to end this year without Saquon if they weren't going to give him a long-term deal.
But it's not about Saquon. It's about like what's your plan?
Well,
and so now all of a sudden, and we know that they're not going to tell us. Like they don't. If you trade Saquon, it's like, all right, now what?
Yeah, so
right?
I totally get that. But if you trade Saquon and like he said, you're blown away and you get a second-round pick or something like that, I don't think you have to do the full strip down where like he brought up Xavier McKinney or anything like that. I think one piece, everybody in that locker room, especially if they lose the next 2 games right before the deadline, could understand where this is going. And, oh, by the way, Tiki, can't this also be spun as we didn't reward you with a contract, Saquon, but we appreciate everything you did. You know what we're going to reward you with? A chance to go play for a team that has a chance to go to a Super Bowl this year.
But do you
and
think
sell it back.
Saquon wants that?
Yes.
Do you think Saquon?
Yes.
I'm being perfectly honest.
Why not?
I don't. I don't think that's Saquon's goal. I want to play. I made some money. I mean, he's made $30-something million in his rookie contract. So he's financially okay.
If they came to him and said the Buffalo Bills have offered us a second-round pick, he wouldn't want to go to a chance to win a Super Bowl?
I don't think that's Saquon's motivation. I don't know.
Yeah, but Tiki,
because I've never asked him this, but I don't think that's what he's thinking about.
No. There's a difference. I don't think Saquon Barkley is going to force his way out. I don't think he's going to call up Joe Shane and say, "Hey, Joe, things are going bad. Get me out of here." But I do think if he receives a phone call in the next week and a half from Joe Shane, and Joe says, "Look, Saquon, things aren't going well. We're trading you to the Baltimore Ravens."
Mm-hmm.
You don't think after the initial shock and the disappointment of it not working here, Saquon would be like, "Oh my God, this is awesome."
Reunite with Odell, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, my God, this is amazing.
Look.
So it's not him wanting to leave, but would he be happy about being traded up in the standings with a chance to win? I think most competitors would, wouldn't they?
Yeah, yes, once it happened. But in real time, I don't think that's what Saquon wants. I honestly think
What does he want?
I think he wants to be a Giant.
I think
life.
he wants a long-term contract, which the Giants weren't willing to give him.
Yes, but I think he also wants to be here and be a part of bringing this team back to its glory. I honestly feel that that's who he is and what he wants to do. Now, if circumstances are proven otherwise and Joe Shane has a different plan, Saquon's going to go and he's going to be great somewhere else. It'll be fine. And we'll be pissed off about it when he does go win a championship for the Baltimore Ravens or whoever, right? But in this moment, I don't think Saquon's saying, "Get me out of here. This is a sinking ship.
No.
And I don't want to be a part of plugging
No, I don't
the
think
hole."
he's doing that either. I agree. I just think that
Well, shouldn't he have accepted then $12 million a year for 3 years if he really wanted to be here long term? Did not squabbled over getting Christian McCaffrey
that's
money?
not fair either because
I understand
my
it's a
answer
business.
to Tiki is he wants a long-term deal. The Giants weren't willing to go as far as he thought he was worth. Now, maybe next offseason the Buffalo Bills are or the Baltimore Ravens are. Obviously, that can't happen now. Maybe other teams will be willing to do that. The Indianapolis Colts were eventually willing to do it. But if the Giants weren't willing to do it this offseason, they're not going to do it next offseason or the offseason after that. That's why I view Saquon Barkley and the Giants, Tiki, as a temporary marriage. It's a one-year Band-Aid. And if it's a one-year Band-Aid and I got 1 year that's a disaster and would turn into a bigger disaster if they lose to Washington on Sunday, I got to make the best of it. And the more I see Derrick Henry trade rumors and I see what the package could look like, the more I think to myself, oh, my God, if I could get that for the Giants, sign me up. That sets me up best for the future.
Yeah, look, you're not wrong at what you're suggesting. I'm just saying in practice, it's going to be a lot more complicated, both for the individuals, for the coach, for the general manager, and also, by extension, the fan base. Like, if the fan base may come to terms with it and say, okay, that's fine. I guess I see the bigger picture. But there's still a lot of football left to play this year. And going back to the ugly from 4 years ago, nobody wants to see that. Nobody.
Yeah, but you keep going back to that because you said earlier it's not about the fans. And you didn't mean that in a mean way.
No.
Nor should you.
No.
Because you never make decisions about the fans. Let's be honest.
Of course.
You're a bad organization if you're making decisions based on how the fans feel about something. You should make decisions that are best for your franchise.
Yep.
I respect the Giant fan base. Believe it or not, I think the Giant fans, this is not me being up pandering. Why would I say this? I think the Giant fans are the most intellectual fans in our town. We've got a scale of the smart fans and the idiot fans. Obviously, the dumbest fans in this town are Knick fans. I think we all understand that.
Definitely.
Yeah, clearly. The smartest fans in this town, not Met fans. I didn't say that. Not Jet fans.
Don't say Nets.
No, it's Giant fans.
Of course.
That's what I'm saying. No, I genuinely, I'm kissing your asses for 30 seconds. I think the Giant fan is the smartest fan in New York City. And I think they would get it. I think if Joe Shane says, this is a bad year, we're sorry, we're embarrassed, but now we're going to make moves that help us pivot in the future, I think 80% of Giant fans would say, you know what, this sucks. I may not want to go to a game on Sunday, but I appreciate that. Let's go.
And I also just think that on top of that, while we'd be accepting, I don't think trading Saquon means now we're screwed for the next 3 years. Because you should have already been planning for that future anyway.
Especially if you weren't willing to give him a long-term deal.
Yep.